Women who laugh at the future. And the men who love them. And the men are hopefully laughing too, right? We'll all laugh together. How did we do last Sunday with the word? Is that it? The men, how did he do last Sunday with the ministry? I heard from several people. I know the ladies were really blessed. And I think the men were too. I think there's a lot of ministry for everybody. You'll find out today too that even if you're not a woman, there are a lot of principles that will be applying all over this room today. So it's going to be good. God said, do you have something, Evie? Okay. Oh gosh, no. I need to use this mic today. God said when he created, it is good. And so all the systems, if you can just picture all of creation as this huge machine, that every part was so in time, everything was so harmonious, nothing was out of sync. It was all extreme perfection. Everything rotating in perfect harmony, all the balance was there, the rhythm was there, until one little apple tilted everything. It's incredible because it really did. The fabric of the whole universe altered because everything fit just right. And when one piece went, the whole thing distorted. That one imperfection began a cascading avalanche of plates spinning out of control, affecting all of creation up till today, including politics. And God is a God of arrangement, not a God of slavery, but he is a God of arrangement, design. He decorates really well. And his arrangement, his order, leads everything into freedom. There's a place for everything. There's a time for everything. And it's perfect. But sin itself means to miss the mark, to miss the time, to miss the spot. And the first time something missed, that one imbalance threw the world, threw the universe into, at worst, cataclysmic chaos, and at best, distorted, twisting, bending. 1 Corinthians 14 says this. This is about the nature of God. God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. Disorder is dis-ease, discomfort, is lack of peace, lack of harmony. Everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. You walk into God's house and the lamp is where it ought to be. You just walk in. Some houses isn't it that way. Just it's not like they're so, just everything is not just picked up. It's just, man, if that's the picture that ought to be on that wall. You know, everything's just in the right place. That's the way God is. And God's order equals peace. He makes things fit as they ought to. He's the traffic cop in the middle of the busy intersection. He doesn't stifle life with this thing called order. He allows it. He doesn't slow things down. He lets them go. He releases them. The solution to bad order is never no order, though we would think so at times. It's God's order. So when is order bad? When is arrangement bad if God is the God of arrangement? We're going to get to the ladies here sooner or later. Romans 8. There is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free. Who did it? Christ, through the Spirit, has set you free. He did it from the law of sin and death. For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the flesh, who did it? God did. You didn't. God did, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met by us? In us. Met in us. Who do not live according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Now this is where we come in. This is our receiving. That's all his doing. None of our doing. But this is our response to all of his doing. This is how we respond. Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set. Where do you put it? Have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live according to the Spirit, in accordance with the Spirit, have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. That's our part. He is the constant, we're the variable. The work is done, it's finished, it's perfect, and it's complete. And it's sitting there in our lap. And he's saying, and then this is how you respond. The mind governed by the flesh is death, when the flesh is in control of the thinking. But the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. Now, government, order, authority, all of that is from God. So when it's bad, why is it bad? See, the flesh distorts what is good. The flesh bends and twists it. The Spirit makes it good again. The Spirit brings it into what it was originally intended to be. The problem is never government itself, but what's behind it. Is it flesh-based or is it Spirit-based? In the 60s and 70s, submission in church life for those that were, how many remember those times? Kind of hanging around charismatic circles. How many weren't born then? Aaron, Mark, yeah, Joey, you guys. You missed all the fun. In the 60s and 70s, submission came to the front. Do you remember that? That word, it's like we just discovered it for the first time. It's there in the Bible. And man, was that handy. We used it. Man learned how to become approved by God, acceptable because they're good leaders, taught leaders, leadership. Women to be righteous followers. And then we had submission working its way through pastors and churches. You remember all of that good stuff. So leadership and submission were a mixture of flesh and spirit. There's a lot of parts of it that were not spirit faith based. They were work or flesh based. Don't remember too much, Abby, because she went to my church back then. Attempting to gain God's approval through leadership, and we became controlling, and submission became intolerable. Now she's smiling, but that's a smile that's part of the rule book. Submission became intolerable slavery and oppression in church life and in family life, but the solution to bad order isn't no order. Now here's the key to order at the home. Let's look at it. See, aren't I brave today? What a courageous teaching you're about to hear. It takes the wisdom of Solomon to walk this one. Men use 1 Corinthians 11 to prove that they are the woman's head, but many times lifted out of context. Me, Tarzan. You submit. But in the context, you have to get it in context here. Now my question is, did God the Father force his headship on Christ? Did he demand it? Was Christ under threat? No, Christ submitted himself. And it was volitional free will. Is Christ trapped? How would you like to be Christ? I'm the second person of the Trinity. Bummer. I'll never be the first person of the Trinity. God is the Father is always number one. Who made me and the Holy Spirit number two and number three? You know, is there, why isn't that there? Why isn't that in them? Christ isn't trapped in the order he's in, is he? If anybody's free, he is. He's not controlled, and he's not unhappy. Did Jesus now intimidate people to follow him? How did he react to the rich young ruler that decided, no thanks, I'm walking away? He watched him. And when he asked, and then that's something from the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, the one who possesses all authority. And when he asked his closest disciples if they were leaving, are you leaving? What kind of leadership is that? What kind of head are you anyway? Are you going?
You can say it like, are you leaving me too?
Yeah, are you leaving me too? And they said this, no, you have what we want here. So I think we'll keep following. In context, a husband leads to the same degree that he follows Christ. Now, she may be in position, but his actual leadership, this is last week, has to do with his ability to be led. Goes no further. Does he make her follow? See, we have to get this all in context. This is part of God's headship. Does she want to follow? Is she any less free? Is she number two? Listen, Jesus and Paul modeled submission to earthly authority, whether religious or civil. Didn't they? Just think for a second, stop and think, really think this through. Were Jesus and Paul good models to follow in submitting as God would want submission here on earth?
Yes.
Can we trust their example? Now, they were never slaves. They had a free submission. But it was not a slavery. They never became slaves to the civil authorities, did they? But all the persecution, if you think about it, that they endured, and they endured a bunch, was because now and then they chose to ignore civil and religious authorities, didn't they? Did they? Okay. Now, I'm not saying go be a rebel. They weren't rebels. Jesus said, hey, they sit in the seat of Moses, do what they say. You know, he understood authority. He submitted to authority. He recognized it. So I'm not saying don't obey. He went and paid tax when he didn't have to pay tax. But I'm saying we've got to finesse this submission thing a little bit. Because on one hand, it doesn't seem to work, and so we just want to throw the whole thing out, as if the word isn't in there. Any husband that wants his wife to fear him, not respect him. See, fear comes out of control. Respect comes out of supply. Any husband that wants the wife to fear her is a fool. Because sooner or later, he himself will lose interest in her. You want to demand that that woman gives you everything that you want and bends to every desire that you have, you'll get bored. You'll walk away. And he's a fool because women who fear their husbands out of control learn to hate them in time. We all hate people that we fear, given enough time. How are we all doing so far? Any biblically submitted wife who is worth her salt will have the strength to stand up to her husband's foolishness every now and then. And I'm talking about true biblical submission, as Peter, as Paul, as Jesus. Any biblically submitted woman in a marriage who is worth her salt will stand up to her husband. Some of the most wonderful things I've learned were when Mona and I came into a showdown on something, and she did not budge. And I screamed, and I squawked, and I kicked. And I found out some things when the dust on the inside of me settled down a little bit. When the husband is spirit-led, the wife wants to follow. When he's flesh-led, he's controlling. But even if he's spirit-led, a flesh-led woman can't follow the spirit. What if she's spirit-led and he's flesh-led? And she's in a submitted position. Question, did Jesus recognize Pilate's God-given authority when he stood in front of him? Yeah. He said, my Father gave you that authority. See, Jesus knew he had authority. Jesus knew under law, Jesus knew he was still submitted to Pilate. And he was. Pilate was frustrated with him because he said, I am commanding. That's where the authority came up. I am in charge. I have the authority. Why aren't you talking when I asked you to? Because he was going to go like a lamb quiet to the slaughter. And in that case, he chose to ignore the God-given authority that he recognized that was over him. Was he unsubmitted? No. He was submitted to God's authorities and order. Now, another question. Does the head limit the body's growth or advance it in a natural body? Should be easy to think that one through. Barnabas and Saul became Paul and Barnabas, and we understood what the change of names meant and why. But in just the same way, Aquila and Priscilla became Priscilla and Aquila and stayed that way. Now, Priscilla's giftings became prominent, outstanding, because Aquila didn't lead. I'm proposing it's because he was a great leader, because he led her well. See, the idea that if he is the head, his giftings should outshine me, I don't think is biblical. I think, in fact, if a man is a great leader, she will find her place and she will fulfill her function as God intended. So how are you all doing? Good. Mona watches me work on this week. She said, what are you doing? I said, don't ask. Spirit is other-centered and liberating. Flesh is self-centered and controlling. When there's conflict in a marriage, the problem is never order. It's the flesh is around on one side or the other. So dealing with the flesh, how do you deal with the flesh? Do you crack the whip? Down, woman, down. Don't you know I'm being spiritual? The whip, sword, discipline, has a place in God in protecting society, protecting the church, protecting the family from destructive influences. But the whip is not how God leads his people. That's the wrong kingdom. That's the other kingdom. So the question is, when God put this all together, what was he thinking? When he said, okay, now everything's going to weave together and it's all going to be connected, and the spinning over here is going to affect spinning over here, and it's all going to be intricate, and it's all going to harmonize, and then it's all going to fall. But it's all going to stay connected anyway. And I have an order, an arrangement, and a design, but it's all going to be bent and twisted, but I'm going to keep it all connected. What was he thinking? What was he thinking when he sent a spirit-led Christ, perfectly spirit-led, into a totally flesh-led world? And it's order that he wanted the spirit-led Christ to stay submitted to. What was he thinking? Why did he do that? Knowing that the flesh and the spirit are at war, which they are. What was he thinking when he asked you to be filled with Spirit, led by the Spirit, in a family and in a marriage where you might be the only one. Especially asking you to put yourself, wives, in alignment with a husband that possibly might be very spiritual and also possibly might be the worst example of spirituality ever. And he says, now, there's an order here. What are you supposed to do with that? How does that work? Ladies, have you ever run into, is this relevant to, don't answer. Listen, there's something very beautiful here. Actually very beautiful, very powerful. But first I need to give you a disclaimer so that you know I'm not a renegade of some sort. 1 Corinthians 7 says, a wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does. Now here's a disclaimer, and then I'll give you a definition. In this church, we're never ever going to counsel people to divorce. I just won't. Not going to happen. But if it's a choice between separation and battery, I won't say separate, but I'll say you might want to take the lesser of two evils here. Unfortunate, but you might have to. If it's a choice between divorce and murder or suicide, you might want to go with the lesser of two evils. Sometimes those choices are very real. I'll always hold marriage up to be protected, preserved, when possible. But I used to be, and some of you can testify to this, I used to be judge, jury, and executioner. And I did it right in front of hundreds of people, more than once, in these things, and not now. Give people their biblical options if they need to have the Bible explained. Let them know. Be clear if they ask for your advice. But once they make a personal judgment call before God, leave it to them and God. Leave it to them and the Lord, and help them heal up and find their way forward. Well, yeah, but that Samaritan shouldn't have gone down. Help them get up. Help them go on. You don't have to understand it all. We also need a quick definition of marriage here. We shouldn't, should we? But man, we have to define what a guy and gal are, so we might as well define marriage too. 1 Corinthians 6. He who unites himself with a prostitute is one body with her. Interesting. Malachi 2:14. She is your wife by covenant. By covenant. Sleeping or living together doesn't equal marriage. You came in just in time, Abraham. Sleeping or living together doesn't equal marriage. Some people don't know that. Like with the Lord, marriage comes, our relationship with the Lord came by covenant. He wrote it down, put it on paper or on scroll, parchment. Hebrews 8:10. The 4 clauses to it, spelling out our relationship, his commitment to it. Declared it before heaven and earth. Marriage is a vow that isn't just spiritual, it's also social. Like murder, spiritual, but it's social. Many things like that. And it's witnessed to by God and man. Somebody might say, well, paper doesn't marry us. Well, yeah, swimming doesn't baptize you. Grape juice and bread doesn't give you communion. It's not the water, it's not the elements, it's not the grape juice, and it's not the paper. But it is the covenant that's on the paper. That marries you, according to God. Now, I promised you something powerful and beautiful, so back to, what was God thinking? Here's going on in 1 Corinthians 7. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, she has to have faith. He has to have faith. No, they actually don't. If they're not a believer and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who's not a believer, not in the same place in faith, in flesh versus spirit, and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. You're God's freedman. Now he uses the idea of slavery as an extreme example and applies, but the context is marriage. But he uses the idea of slavery. Are you a slave? And then don't let trouble you, God's free man. Are you pledged to a woman? There you go back to the covenant. Are you pledged to a woman? Don't seek to be released from her. So you can say, God would say to you, if I can bless a slave, I can bless a spiritual person that is bound and pledged to a married person that is fleshly. If I can do that. Don't let it trouble you, God says. Don't let it trouble you. I'm bigger than that. I can handle it. In fact, if you think about it, ever since Christ came into this world, it's really the normal state of things for the spiritual to rub shoulders with the unspiritual and recognize order in the process. It seems like a disadvantage, but it's not. It's the plan. John 19, verse 8. Pilate was even more afraid when he heard what was being said about Jesus. So here in this illustration, who has the sword? Pilate. Who has the status and position and standing? Pilate. Who is in charge? Pilate. Not really. Who really was in control? Jesus. Who was orchestrating things? Jesus. Was Jesus a slave there? No, he was free to come or go. He could have walked away. Who had the power, the strength, and the upper hand? Jesus. In order, in submission. And deciding not to talk when he didn't want to. He lived in the world he created. He submitted himself to powers that be, including his own parents. And when he was heading toward the cross, he told his disciples, don't worry about this world, I've overcome it. When did he do that? He lived in the order and overcame. Submission isn't being a punching bag, a weakling, a fearful person. It's knowing God's state of things and his arrangement in a fallen world, and by him overcoming it all in the middle of it all. Anyway, 1 Peter 3, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. Own is important. To your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over. This is a winning sort of thing. Without words, by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity. And the word purity in the Greek, the first definition is that which incites respect. Purity and reverence of their wives. Your beauty, it's interesting, the word beauty here is cosmos, the one that's normally used for worlds. Your arrangement, your order, your design, your decoration, your ornamentation. Your beauty should not come from the outward cosmos, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or clothes. Some religions take away jewelry and take away hair adornment, but they leave the clothes. But he's saying that it doesn't come from that. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading. The word unfading means imperishable, indestructible, immortal beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn, cosmeo, arrange, ornament themselves. Where does the gentle and quiet spirit come from? From weak women who have learned to shut up? Is that the gentle and quiet spirit? From slaves who have been beat up emotionally, if not physically? Is that where the gentle, quiet spirit comes from? You're now this moldable little puppy? Or from women that have learned that the problem is never God's order, his cosmos. That's beautiful. But the flesh. But they've also learned that even when the flesh distorts God's order and twists it and makes it something God never intended it to be, spirit overcomes flesh, just as Jesus overcame the world. Listen, the God who set you free, women, to be free indeed, and said that you're not to submit yourself again to a yoke of slavery, hasn't called you into slavery in marriage any more than Jesus and Paul were slaves to those they submitted themselves to. Submitted but free. Submitted but free. So how do you do that? What's the answer? Well, he says, how did they? The women of old, they put their faith in God. Women of faith. He's not talking about becoming a mindless robot in marriage. He's talking about living in submission like Jesus before Pilate, when you might not have position, but you have power. They submitted themselves to their own husbands like Sarah, who obeyed, the word hupako means listen to, and called him her Lord. She was laughing in her tent at the promise God was making. That's the only time she called Abraham Lord. And she never called him that out loud. She would say, you're my master. You're my master. I ask Mona to do that every now and then. But she never called him Lord. What was happening was in her tent, in her thoughts. She was thinking, shall my Lord have pleasure? She was thinking that in her mind. And so Jesus, who called her out and chided her for laughing, and she said, I didn't laugh because she was embarrassed and nervous. He said, yeah, you laughed. The same Jesus that called her out for laughing also commended her in Hebrews when he wrote down, and in her thinking she was calling him Lord. See, there is something that had happened in Sarah over the years, because he got the dream, he got the call, he got the vision, he got the encounter with God, and she's sitting there, and finally she decides, I'm beginning to understand the order of this thing. He's out there talking to Jesus right now. I think what he's saying might be right. Maybe this is something God's doing through him. And she could believe along with him. She hadn't always been that way. She was so fearful, she even recommended Hagar to him. How many wives would want to do that, even in that culture? You wouldn't do that. Fear. Your daughters, if you do what is right, and what is right, not give in to fear. Not give in, and in the Greek, to any fear. The bride of Christ right now in our season and time is heading into crazy, wonderfully crazy times. In the order of things, in this season, before Christ comes back is revealed, she's subjected to governments on earth that are led by the flesh, essentially. Isn't that frustrating when you watch the news? The woman called the bride is at times, she might not comply with it. With all due respect, sir, I'm going to keep preaching the gospel like Peter did. At times she may ignore it like Jesus and Paul did. Yet she remains submissive, but inwardly quiet. What is that quiet? What is the quiet in the church when everything is out of control? What is that in her? Is it weakness? It's strength. It's power. See, the order has nothing to do with who's in charge. Jesus had total command in front of Pilate. Listen to me. The bride of Christ will not be weak, and she's not intimidated. Can I tell you, do not let yourself be afraid. Do not let yourself be afraid. And through her faith, she's going to rise up with the Spirit's power. And we can say to this government, you may have the authority that we recognize God has given you, but on this point, no, I stand my ground. With all due respect, sir, I'm submitted. Without fear, no fear, wives, no fear in your homes. No fear. No fear in your homes. Proverbs 31. She is clothed, this is the virtuous woman. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. That's God's ideal for every wife on the face of the earth. She's clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the world and life to come. Amen? Is that our woman? Okay. Ladies, I don't know if you agree with the teaching today or not, but if you dare,